Today we're going to learn about another Mexican club. This is Club Necaxa. They're from the city of Aguascalientes. They were founded as a company team for an electric company in the area. They took the name Necaxa from the river that flowed past the power plant because they were not allowed to use a private company's name for the name of their club. Since they were founded as part of an electric company, they're pretty similar to a previous club we talked about, Club Emelec from Ecuador, and as a company team, it's pretty similar to Bayer Leverkusen from Germany. Club carry a couple of nicknames, most based off of that heritage as an electric company team. The first being Los Rayos, or the Lightning. Second, the Electricians. And because of their golden era and dominant success during the 1990s, they are known as the Team of the Decade. Late last year, I was able to hunt down this kit, the 2019-20 home kit for the club. I liked it a lot because, one, it's made by Charlie, brand that's only specifically in Mexico for teams, as well as the fact that it has this gray muted area across the top, which fades down into these vertical stripes. But the cool thing about them is you can see that the stripes themselves are made out of the badge, as well as the name of the club and some lightning bolts in there. That was a cool look. So when you think about Mexican football, not many people have the name Necaxa come to mind, but if you were smart enough to be watching the sport in the 1990s there, it definitely is a name that should come to mind, seeing as I talked about them being the team of the decade there. They won all three of the Primera División titles during that decade and were runners-up 3 different times. So 6 out of 10 years, they were right there at the top. That was a dominant decade for them. So that silverware cabinet has those 3 titles, 95, 96, and 98. They've also won the second division in the country 4 different times as they've moved through divisions at times during their history. They've also won the cup competition in the country 8 different times. That being a pretty good haul for a club outside of Mexico City or Monterrey. Beyond that, they've won the Champions Cup in the CONCACAF region. That's currently the Champions League 2 different times. They won in the 70s and capped off that great 90s period by winning it in 1999, including also the Cup Winners' Cup in 1994. So all of those compounding to that being an incredible decade for Necaxa. I'll keep harping on people for not thinking about Necaxa in the context of Mexican football nowadays by saying they have one of the longest standing rivalries within Mexican football with Atlante. 2 quick claims to fame for Necaxa are they've defeated 2 of the most important squads in the world, the first being Real Madrid, who they defeated in the year 2000 in the Club World Cup, the first time they had that competition. This was a squad that had Raul in it, as well as Roberto Carlos and Guti, some of the most important players that have ever played for Real Madrid. And they defeated them and finished 3rd in the competition that year, which was really unlikely for a team from Mexico. The second would be going all the way back to the 60s for a 4-3 win against Pelé's Fantásticos, against Santos of Brazil. That was one of the most important squads in the history of the game. Let's talk about former players for the club, and since we focused so much on the success in the 1990s, I'll start with the most important catalyst of that success in that era, that being the Ecuadorian Alex Aguinaga. He was a midfielder for the club. He came over to them at the tail end of the 80s, played pretty much all of the 90s, and was successful with them in that era where they won 7 different trophies with him. Second man that needs to be named from that era would be Sergio Zarate. He was an Argentine outside midfielder who paired really well with Aguinaga and was important because of his pace in those outside positions for their offensive capabilities in the 1990s. Third man to name would be Octavio Becerril, and I can't roll my R's, so that doesn't sound just right, but he was an incredible defender for the club and a key man in solving a lot of the defensive problems they had at the beginning of the 90s, which had halted them from the trophy success that you'll notice came in the middle to late part of the 90s. And the last man from that period will be Ivo Basay. He was a striker for the club in the first half of the 90s, scoring 2 goals, 1 in each leg of El Gran Final in 1995 when they won their first title. Finished out his career afterwards back in Chile at Colo-Colo. Let's talk about their current squad and current situation, because the Apertura tournament was awful for them. They finished bottom of the league, but the Clausura is starting off pretty well for them. But they have one hurdle they really need to get over, and that is converting draws that they're having too many of into victories. They're not closing out games, and they're not being clinical in the last 15 or 20 minutes to see things out. They have a couple young players that they're melding together, and the first I'll talk about is Deber Cambindo. He's a player they took on loan from Cruz Azul in the offseason, and he's starting to contribute the goals that the club needs. Second man to mention is Alexis Peña. He's a player that the new ownership of the club has brought in recently, and I think as a center back, he's their key piece that they want to build around defensively. Same kind of idea as Octavio Becerril coming into the club in the 90s and solidifying things for them in order to have further success. The most exciting attacking talent they have, in my opinion, is Ricardo Monreal. He can play as a striker, but I think he's more valuable when he plays out on the right wing. 23 years old, is a young talent and a good man to build around offensively for the club going forward. So there's your 101 rundown on Club Necaxa from Aguascalientes in Mexico.